The heavy iron gate slammed shut. The sound did not just echo. It traveled through the damp floor and vibrated directly into the soles of his feet. Ade stood still, listening to the finality of the bolts sliding into place. The corridor outside went silent. He turned. The room was barely 6 paces wide, 4 paces deep. A single bulb hung from a frayed wire in the center of the ceiling. It flickered with an irregular, stuttering pulse, casting long, jumping shadows against the sweating concrete walls. He walked to the center of the space and stood under the light. The air smelled of standing water and stale rust. He pressed his palms against the wall. The surface was cold, slick with moisture that clung to his skin. He pulled his hands back and wiped them on his thighs. The light skipped again, plunging the corners of the room into pitch darkness for a fraction of a second before snapping back to life. He sat on the floor, tucked his knees against his chest, and watched the bulb. The silence in the cell was heavy, pressing against his ears. There was no window, no sound of traffic, no sign of the world he had occupied only moments before. He was entirely contained. Ade looked away from the light. On the back of his eyelids, the image of the market remained. The smell of roasted corn, the rhythm of footsteps on pavement, the light touch of Ngozi walking beside him. It had been an ordinary afternoon. The sun was high, the street was crowded, and he was laughing at something she had said. Then, the sound changed. The low, aggressive hum of an engine cut through the noise of the crowd. A black SUV surged onto the curb, blocking their path. The market chatter died instantly. 4 doors opened in unison. Men in dark suits stepped out, moving with a synchronized, mechanical precision that had no place in a public market. Ade had reached for Ngozi, a reflex born of instinct, but a hand clamped onto his shoulder and spun him around. He barely had time to shout her name before the pavement rushed up to meet his face. They didn't speak, they didn't explain. They simply hoisted him off his feet, his heels dragging against the asphalt, and shoved him into the back of the vehicle. The door slammed. The world of sunlight and noise vanished, replaced by the smell of leather and stale air. He remembered the view through the rear window. Ngozi standing frozen in the middle of the street, shrinking into a tiny, motionless point as the car accelerated away. The station interior was a blur of fluorescent flickers and the smell of floor wax. Ade was pushed forward, his boots scuffing the linoleum. He tried to turn, to demand an explanation, but a heavy hand on his neck forced him toward a high wooden desk. Behind it sat a sergeant. The man did not look up. He was busy stamping a stack of files with a rhythmic, indifferent thud. Ade cleared his throat. "Why am I here? Who ordered this?" The sergeant didn't pause. He didn't even shift his gaze. He simply slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, his finger tapping a bold, stamped seal at the bottom. The paper was clean, official, and final. "Orders from the top," the sergeant muttered, his voice devoid of interest. He flipped the paper over and pushed it toward the holding area. Ade reached for it, but the sergeant pulled his hand back, his expression hardening into a flat, empty mask. He pointed toward the back hallway. There was no room for debate. There was no law here, only the weight of the man who had ordered his disappearance. Ade looked at the sergeant, searching for a trace of humanity, but found only the dull, gray reflection of a cog in a machine. He was nudged forward again. The gate was already waiting. The gray wall of the cell dissolved. Ade was back in the lobby of the corporate tower 3 days ago. The air there had been chilled by heavy ventilation, smelling of polished stone and expensive cologne. He had been waiting for Ngozi when the tapping of a cane against the marble floor silenced the room. Chief Okafor did not walk. He patrolled. He stopped inches from Ade, his presence heavy enough to disrupt the flow of traffic in the lobby. The chief leaned forward, his hands tightening around the handle of his cane. The wood creaked under the pressure of his grip. His focus was absolute, a predator narrowing his view to a single point. "My daughter belongs to a different world," the chief growled, the vibration of his voice low and steady. He shifted his weight, the cane digging into the floor tiles with a sharp, rhythmic click. "If you do not vanish from her life, you will regret it." Ade had stood his ground, the muscles in his jaw aching from the tension of the standoff. He had refused to step back. He had refused to look away. Now, staring at the damp, cracked plaster of his cell. The echo of that warning felt heavier than the bars themselves. He had chosen to stay, and this room was the cost. The heavy iron door groaned on its hinges. Ade stood, his boots scraping against the uneven floor as he turned toward the entrance. A man walked in, holding a thin manila folder. It was Mr. Ibrahim, the public defender. He did not step fully into the cell. He remained in the doorway, his eyes scanning the pages with a practiced, detached speed. Ade stepped forward, his palms pressed against the cold metal of the bars. "Can you get me out?" he asked. Ibrahim did not answer immediately. He flipped to the final page, let out a sharp, audible sigh, and closed the folder with a snap. "I cannot represent you," Ibrahim said. The words were flat, stripped of any professional empathy. Ade reached through the bars, his fingers twitching, but Ibrahim took a deliberate step back. "The chief has already spoken to the firm. Even if I wanted to help, my fees are beyond your reach. You have no money, no witnesses, and no leverage." The lawyer did not wait for a response. He turned on his heel and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, each sound growing fainter until the heavy outer door slammed shut. Ade stood in the center of the cell, the silence rushing back in to fill the space where the hope of justice had just been extinguished. The sound of the closing door left a ringing in his ears that refused to fade. Ade sat back down on the concrete, his back against the damp corner. The room was a box of shadows and stagnant air. He began to trace the hairline fractures in the wall, one by one. He counted them to keep his mind from drifting. 10 cracks near the floor, 12 more snaking upward toward the ceiling. When he finished one section, he started again from the corner, his thumb grazing the rough, cold surface of the stone. The light from the single bulb flickered, casting long, erratic shadows that made the walls seem to pulse. He had no watch, no window, and no sound from the outside world. The hunger in his stomach was a dull, constant ache, but the emptiness in the corridor was worse. He stopped counting and pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw flashes of white light. Nothing moved outside. The silence was not just an absence of noise. It was a physical weight pressing against his chest, forcing his breath to become short and shallow. He was a ghost in a tomb of his own making, waiting for a clock that no longer ticked. The fourth day began exactly like the others, with the same dim, flickering light and the same damp chill rising from the concrete. Ade was staring at the ceiling, tracing the same hairline fracture for the 100th time, when the sound of heavy iron bolts sliding back shattered the silence. He pushed himself upright, his muscles stiff. He expected the guard, or perhaps a final interrogation, but the person standing in the doorway was a stranger. The man did not speak. He did not even step inside the cell. He simply reached into a leather bag, pulled out a thick, heavy envelope, and dropped it onto the floorboards. The paper hit the ground with a dull, solid thud. Before Ade could even form a question or pull himself toward the bars, the man turned and retreated into the darkness of the corridor. The heavy door groaned, swung shut, and the lock clicked into place with a finality that echoed through the small space. Ade remained frozen on the floor, his breath hitching in his chest. The envelope lay there, a stark, white anomaly against the gray, stained concrete. He crawled forward, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch the heavy, high-quality paper. It was cold, clean, and entirely out of place in his tomb. Ade tore the seal with his fingernails, the sound sharp in the cramped cell. He spilled the contents onto the floor. A stack of legal documents slid out, followed by a single sheet of paper covered in elegant, flowing script. He held the pages under the dim bulb, his eyes scanning the lines. The words were precise. They promised immediate release, a ticket to the city of Lagos, and a substantial sum of money. The condition was clear. He was to sign away all ties to Ngozi. He was to disappear, to become a ghost, to never contact her again. The ink seemed to mock him. He looked at the signature at the bottom, a cold, calculated demand for his surrender. He felt the paper between his thumb and forefinger, the texture smooth and expensive, a stark contrast to the grit of the concrete beneath him. The offer was a trap wrapped in silk. It was a bridge out of his misery, But the toll was the only thing that gave his life meaning. He turned the pages over, searching for a loophole, but found only the cold logic of the law. The silence of the room returned, heavier than before, as he sat with the price of his soul resting in his lap. Ade stood up, his joints popping in the quiet. He moved toward the cell door, the metal floor cold beneath his bare feet. He stopped at the bars and reached out, wrapping his fingers around the iron. He squeezed. He pressed his weight forward until his fingers turned pale and the skin stretched tight over his knuckles. The metal did not yield. It never did. He looked down at the floor outside the cell where the envelope lay. The sunlight from the high window catching the edge of the ticket to Lagos and the metallic glint of the car keys. They were symbols of a door opening, a way out of the damp, the dark, and the crushing weight of the walls. He felt the pull of the exit, the instinct to survive, to breathe air that didn't taste of rust. His grip tightened further, the iron digging into his palms, a sharp, grounding pain. He stared at the keys. He stared at the ticket. The silence in the room stretched thin, vibrating with the force of his internal struggle. Every muscle in his arms was locked, his breath coming in short, jagged bursts. He was trapped between the person he wanted to be and the crushing reality of his cage. Ade let go of the iron bars. His hands shook, but his purpose was set. He bent down and retrieved the thick envelope from the concrete. He did not look at the keys or the ticket again. Instead, he gripped the legal papers with both hands and began to tear. He ripped the contract once, then twice, then into smaller and smaller strips. He worked with a rhythmic, steady focus, the sound of shredding paper cutting through the silence of the cell. He let the pieces flutter to the floor, where they settled like snow against the damp stone. The ultimatum was now nothing more than debris. He moved back to the center of the cell and sat down, his back against the wall. He pulled his knees to his chest and stared into the darkness. The weight of his poverty remained, as did the cold and the isolation. But the internal pressure had vanished. He was exactly where he had been, yet he was no longer a victim of the choice offered to him. He watched the shadows shift on the ceiling, listening to the distant, muffled sounds of the station, waiting for whatever came next. He had lost his freedom, but he had kept his word. He sat perfectly still, anchored by a defiance that no cell could contain.